Over on Jaguar Gatorade, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about the 1995 Copper Bowl and how Utah got screwed out of playing in that game because of their basketball team. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. Here's a trivia question for you. Some of the greatest wide receivers in the history of the Cincinnati Bengals have donned the number 80 jersey. From 1981 to 88, it was worn by this man right here, Chris Collinsworth. Now here's a guy who was an absolutely fantastic receiver for the Bengals throughout the 1980s, and has a claim for being one of the greatest players in franchise history. Heck, if you made a list of the top 10 players to ever play for the Bengals, he might be on it. Collinsworth made 3 Pro Bowls, was named a second-team All-Pro by the Associated Press 3 times, finished his career with just a hair under 6,700 receiving yards, and finished inside the top 5 of the league in receptions and receiving yards during the strike-shortened 1982 season. Many Bengals fans associate, and continue to associate, the number 80 jersey with Chris Collinsworth, and it's not hard to see why. However, that jersey number was not retired, because from 1992 to 94, it was worn by this man right here, Carl Pickens. Pickens switched to the number 81 jersey in 1995, so you might associate him more with that number. But Pickens was another fantastic receiver for the team for a long period of time. In his career with the Bengals, before things kind of went off the rails at the end, he made 2 Pro Bowls, was named a second-team All-Pro twice, was named the Offensive Rookie of the Year in 1992, becoming just the second player in Bengals history at the time, alongside Eddie Brown, to receive this honor, and he led the league in 1995 with 17 touchdowns. By the time his time in Cincinnati ended, he had 530 receptions for 6,887 yards and 63 touchdowns, being one of the lone bright spots on those awful Bengals teams. So okay, Collinsworth wore the jersey in the 80s, and Pickens wore the jersey in the first half of the 90s. Here's the question. Who wore the jersey in between? Stumped? Well, it was this man right here, a wide receiver by the name of Lynn James. If the name sounds familiar to you at all and you're a Bengals fan, odds are it's not for anything that he did on the field, because he wasn't very good. Rather, it was for the incident that is the subject of our story, because in 1991, he felt that he wasn't getting enough playing time, and decided to address the issue in quite literally the stupidest and dumbest way imaginable, to the point where more than 30 years later, it still makes no sense whatsoever. This is the story behind what has to be the strangest, and quite possibly, the stupidest wide receiver in the over half-century-long history of the Cincinnati Bengals franchise. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Lynn James was, how he was playing, and what exactly led to the move that he was about to make. The year is 1990, and the Bengals decided to draft a receiver out of Arizona State by the name of Lynn James. While James's production was not great by any means in college, as he didn't have a touchdown in his first 2 seasons, and didn't really contribute until his senior year in 1989, he made waves throughout the college football world because of his big playability, as even though he only caught 27 passes in 1989, he had 574 yards, averaging an incredible 21.3 yards per catch. Not only did this rank inside the top 10 of the entire NCAA, but it ranked first in the Pac-10, making him the second player in the history of ASU, alongside Aaron Cox, to do this for the Sun Devils. And the Bengals needed some depth at the wide receiver position, as even though they had what seemed like a lethal 1-2 punch in Tim McGee and Eddie Brown, they had no depth behind them, as their third and fourth leading players at the receiver position, Ira Hillary and Mike Martin, were not on the team to start off the 90s. With that, in the 5th round of the 1990 NFL Draft, the Bengals decided to draft James with pick number 122. Just like that, James's dream of being in the NFL was fulfilled. As for playing in the NFL, well, that was an entirely different story. He barely saw the field, and when he didn't take advantage of his opportunity at all. In 1990, as a rookie, James was going to be in the spotlight, and was going to be getting a chance to play after Tim McGee suffered a bruised thigh. He finished his rookie season with 3 receptions. That was it. James talked about his struggles as a rookie, saying, "I've been thinking too much. I've got to start letting my talent take over. I've got to know when to run full speed when I have to, and when to slow down when I have to. I've got to get deeper into the playbook. In other words, James was struggling with literally every aspect of being on the field in the NFL, which is always a good sign. Outside of not knowing the ins and outs of the playbook, not knowing the speed of the game, and getting into his own head, he was doing just great as a pro. And if 1990 was bad, oh boy, 1991 was not going to be much better. Because the last thing I'd want to be doing if I was a receiver looking for playing time is to be out at brunch with my team the day of a Monday Night Football game and get into a fight with my teammate, Ricky Dixon, that makes the news. Through the first 10 weeks of the season, James, while he had a touchdown under his belt at least, only had 7 catches, and mainly came onto the field in special teams duties and in mop-up duties when the Bengals were running 4 wide sets and where defenses were in soft zones because the Bengals were down by a lot. In case you haven't been able to tell, the 1991 Bengals were awful, and you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Things were going absolutely terribly for Lynn James and for the Bengals. By this point in the season, on November 6th, they were 1-8, and were only better than the Indianapolis Colts, who were 0-9 with an offense that made eyes bleed throughout the state of Indiana. The offense was lethargic, mustering up 7 points or less in a third of their games, and James was definitely not helping. They had already turned the ball over a whopping 24 times, for an average of just under 3 times per game. And with James, his production was lacking, and he wasn't getting a lot of playing time, especially now that he was taken off of kickoff return duty. So let's say that you want more playing time. Let's say you want to see the field and prove to the coaches that you belong out there. You would think that the logical thing to do would be to ball out on the practice field, right? Show your worth in practice, play lights out, and prove yourself so that you can play a bigger part in the game on Sunday. In other words, when you're fighting for playing time and you need to show up in practice, the last thing you can do is, miss practice, go AWOL, and completely fall off the face of the earth. Well, prepare yourselves for an absolutely stupid stunt that Lynn James is about to pull, that to this day still makes no sense, and seemed like literally the absolute worst possible way to go about this entire situation. On Wednesday, November 6th, James showed up to the facility and was talking in the locker room with his teammate, fellow wide receiver Mike Barber. Everything seemed fine, and he seemed to be in good spirits. At 9:30 a.m., Lynn James was on the practice field and was running drills with the team. Following practice, James was supposed to be at a wide receivers meeting at 9:50. However, when the meeting started, James was nowhere to be found. That was kind of bizarre. At first, wide receivers coach Dave Shula thought nothing of it. As he said, "I thought maybe he was one of the guys on the weekly list for random drug tests." However, James wasn't at the facility for the rest of the day. He was nowhere to be found. He left on his own without telling a single soul, and decided to just leave the team. Not even his agent knew where he was, saying, "We don't know what happened. We haven't been able to reach Lynn." And General Manager Mike Brown was a bit confused and a bit annoyed, saying, "No one has seen him since early Wednesday. I have some ideas why this happened, but I don't want to get into them until I hear from him. I have a hunch he'll show up soon." Brown then said on this, "There'll be some sanction applied. I don't know what his problem is. He hasn't been here to talk to." The Bengals knew that James was in the city, but knew nothing else besides that, other than the fact that he was okay, as confirmed by his wife. But for days, they were unable to contact James. He was completely off the grid, completely away from his team, and was completely torpedoing whatever was left of his NFL career. Finally, a few days later, Mike Brown was able to get in contact with James. And what was the reason for him going AWOL without telling anyone? Was he rethinking his career in the NFL? Did he have a religious experience, like what happened with Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Wallace Francis a decade earlier in the 1980s, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner? Did he have a family emergency that he had to tend to immediately? Nope. He left the team because he was upset at his lack of playing time. As Brown said on the conversation he had with James over the phone, "He told me he was upset with playing time, and all I got out of the discussion was that it was only a football-related problem." Absolutely genius big brain move. I'm gonna show the coaches that I deserve more playing time when I'm one of the least contributing players on the team by literally leaving the team and not telling anyone, completely abandoning their trust in the process. You realize how stupid that sounds, right? That's like me being a student and my teacher being concerned that I'm doing poorly in math. So I decide to show her by just not even showing up to math class anymore. Yeah, you really got your point across there, Lynn. Way to stick it to the man. As if the 1991 Bengals couldn't get any more dysfunctional and more inept than they already were. However, a few days later, after the Bengals lost 33-27 to the Pittsburgh Steelers to drop to 1-9, James came back to the team and did what he probably should have done a long time ago, which was, talk to his coach about this. Yeah, from all accounts, the first time that head coach Sam Weish knew about James and his frustration with his playing time was when he returned to the facility. Weish initially thought that he left for a religious purpose, and he had no idea that James was frustrated about how all of this went down with his on-field action. The only way for Weish to have known this was to literally read his mind, because James just decided to pack his bags and go without telling anyone why he left, or without giving any indication that this was coming. And Weish took the news of James coming back surprisingly well. He said on the conversation, "Lynn's a good guy. He was just frustrated by a lack of playing time." And amazingly enough, Weish did not rule out the possibility that James would be playing in their game next Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles. That seems absolutely absurd, because you'd think after this, he would be suspended indefinitely or off the roster. But apparently, Weish was thinking about bringing him back onto the team and giving him a role. Weish said, "I'm just going to sleep on this one. It's a tough spot in that you can't let something like that go completely without notice. But at the same time, you don't want to be unfair to the team or the player." What do you mean you don't want to be unfair to the team or the player? The guy left. The guy literally left. If anything, you're being unfair to the team by letting him play. Because what kind of message does that send? If you're upset about your lack of playing time, the way to fix that is to leave the team, and then when you come back, your playing time will increase. That seems like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense now, does it? Amazingly enough, and I cannot believe this, although I kinda can because Sam Weish was not a good head coach, James was allowed to be brought back onto the roster. Everything was in the past. James said he was sorry and that he learned his lesson. Again, what kind of a message is that sending to the team? You're pretending like this never even happened? Well, I guess the Bengals came to their senses and realized, wait a second, hold on. What the heck are we doing here? We're bending over backwards for Lynn James, who wasn't even very good, who got into a scuffle with a teammate earlier in the season before a nationally televised game, and who was so upset about his lack of playing time that he just left and made us all worried? Why are we doing this? Because not even 1 week later, after he played against the Eagles for some reason, he was cut, in a move that probably should have been done about a week ago, but better late than never, I suppose. James said on his cut, "I just felt I wasn't considered in the future of the Bengals." Gee, you think? I wonder what gave it away, and I wonder if you did anything to cause that. I mean, how stupid can you be? I'm glad you have no hard feelings about the cut, because it's kind of amazing you stayed employed for a few more days and got another game check. And to the shock of no one, James did not play in the NFL again after that 1991 season, ending a highly memorable stint in the NFL for all the wrong reasons. 10 catches, 139 yards, 1 touchdown, and one hell of an exit. So what's the moral of the story here? If you want more playing time, then think of what Lynn James did back in 1991. And then do literally the exact opposite. Talk to a coach. Stay after and show that you're putting in the work. Ball out in practice. Ask the right questions. Be a good teammate and an active participant. Don't do, well, this. Don't leave and go AWOL. I promise you, it's not going to work as well as you think it will. And the fact that James actually stayed on the roster for another week after this is somewhat of a minor miracle. If there's any one moment that showcases just how bad the Bengals bungled things, it was this. Lynn James, congratulations. For this stupid stunt of yours, of the hundreds upon hundreds of receivers to ever play for the team, in what is no small feat, you might just be the stupidest receiver in Cincinnati Bengals history. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.